Hello, and welcome to another episode of Navigating Cancer Together. I am your host, Talaya Dendy. Navigating Cancer Together is the show that has something for everyone facing cancer. Why? Because everyone is different with different needs, beliefs, and perspectives. Thank you for joining us for this episode. I encourage you to open your minds and your hearts. Navigating Cancer Together is everywhere. Make sure to subscribe and follow the show to stay updated on our latest episodes. Listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or your preferred podcast app or platform. Today, we have a very special guest, and I want you to keep this question in mind as you listen to the episode. After hearing Amy's perspective, what's one aspect of caregiving, either a challenge or a moment of connection that resonated with your own experience or understanding? I will repeat this question again before we end the show. And keep in mind that you can respond to this question by sending an email to nctpodcastfan@gmail.com. You can also reply on Spotify under Navigating Cancer Together and just click on this episode. I may read some of your responses on future episodes. Let's get to our very special guest, Amy Chastain. Amy Chastain is a registered nurse and caregiver advocate with over 15 years of hands-on experience. A committed follower of Jesus and ministry leader, Amy is compassionate about the hard and holy work of caregiving. She has personally navigated the day-to-day challenges of this role and is dedicated to helping others understand their God-given value and manage caregiving without losing themselves. That is so important. At home, Amy is a wife and mother of 4 with a heart for equipping and encouraging those who care for others. Her approach blends practical guidance with spiritual support, making her a beloved mentor in the caregiving community. Amy, thank you so much for joining us today and welcome.
Thank you, Talaya. I am so happy to be here with you today.
Thank you, Amy. I am so excited for the audience to hear your story, which is really an amazing story and a heartfelt story as well. Before we really dive into the conversation, I'd like for our listeners to really get to know you a little bit more. So, Amy, what's something interesting or unique about yourself that might surprise anyone listening?
Well, I'll tell you a couple of things. So, one really quick, short, fun fact is that I can sing the alphabet backwards.
Wow. Okay.
That was my grandmother taught my mom, and my mom taught me, and I taught my kids. And it's just one of those random things that people are like, how do you know the alphabet backwards? I can't say it backwards, but I can sing it.
That's pretty cool, Amy. When do you find a good time to do that? Do you do it like when, for example, if you're in a meeting and people say, hey, tell us something about yourself? Did you kind
I
of go into it?
I have not pulled it out in public, although
Okay.
it's a good icebreaker. It's just one of those good little random fun facts. But on a more serious note, something about me is that I am one of those people that I don't know what it is, but people that I hardly know will tell me some really personal things or start sharing their life story. And it's been that way since I was a kid. Like I remember being in middle school and, students that I kind of just knew peripherally would come and start, maybe telling me about troubles they were having at home or some big thing that happened. And it's an honor, I think, when someone opens up to me, but it still surprises me as an adult that it just comes out sometimes.
That's a blessing. That means people are really comfortable and you have a really good energy around you. So that's great. Now, Amy, what is something that really lights you up and brings you genuine joy and happiness?
Oh my goodness, that's going to have to be spending time with my family, especially if I can do that in one of my favorite places, which is up in the mountains. I love the beach, but I sunburn really, really easily. And the heat bothers me. So I love to visit the beach, but my real happy place is up in the mountains. You can hear the wind rustling the leaves of the trees, and that just brings me so much peace. And so if I can be in one of my favorite places with some of my family and getting to enjoy some time together, that really just does it for me.
I can really relate. It's something about water, mountains, just
Mhm.
being in nature that is just so fulfilling and it just brings a strong sense of peace. So I can definitely relate to that. Amy, please share what are some experiences that shape Amy Chastain?
I've been thinking about that lately, and I think that my family did a great job instilling the values of hospitality and service. Both of my grandparents are passed now, but when I was growing up, they lived just down the street from us. So it was close enough we could even just walk down there and oh my goodness, she'd spoil us rotten. She had like full-size candy bars in the desk drawer and would be like, "Oh, it's fine. You can have a candy bar." But my grandmother had an open door policy. She was one of those people who, if she found out you didn't have somewhere to be for Thanksgiving, you had somewhere now. She was constantly just scooping up those around her who maybe needed some extra connection. So I grew up with that as being very normal. Like, oh, here's these people you've never met at the Thanksgiving table. Great. How do we meet them? And, my grandfather was military, and my grandmother also was very involved in service back to taking care of military families. And then later in her life, she worked as a CASA, court appointed special advocate for children. She herself lost her mom at a young age to cancer and ended up essentially orphaned. Her father was alive, but not choosing to step up to the plate. So at a very young age, she was passed around from sibling to sibling, and then eventually ended up basically being taken in by her friend's family. And so she really just had a heart for helping kids in tough situations. And so I think just with all of that, the openness and the being aware that there are people around you that are hurting, that really shaped me.
That's very beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. We really need that kind of love and support in the world today. Everything's just kind of all over the place. So we need more people like your grandmother. Amy, many people focus on the practical tasks of caregiving. And in previous conversations, you've highlighted the calling to care for the ones they're holding their hands. Could you please share a specific moment or experience that illuminated this broader understanding of your role as a caregiver? And then how did it shift your approach to caregiving?
So I do have a very specific event. I don't know that I realized it in that exact moment, but it set into motion, the dominoes, right? A dear friend of mine, her mother was dying of cancer and was in hospice. And I had never met her mom. And she just was like, "You're such a dear friend to me. I want my mom to meet you." So she had me actually come into the hospice room, and it was in one of the last days of her mother's life. And she was there with another friend of hers. And, mom was in the bed, not really responsive. And it was just the sitting there and being there with them. And to be honest, a little bit uncomfortable because I didn't know this woman. And this was a very private, intimate moment. And I'm not one for putting the spotlight on myself, or I don't like to feel like people are looking at me and all of that. But I was kind of prompted. And so I pushed through my unease and said, "Can I pray for you all before I leave?" And she said, "Yes, that'd be wonderful." So we gathered around the bed and I said a little prayer. And mom kind of stirred while I did that. And my friend just really reacted to that. And that kind of set me into motion of what is it that I'm supposed to be doing right now? I had come off of a season of leadership at church. Two of my older children had gone off to college. And so I was really in that phase of, okay, what's next? What am I supposed to be doing? And after some conversations, with my family and with my pastor, my husband goes, "Do you want to go to seminary?" And I said, "Do I?" "No, I don't think so," because I was thinking about, the role of a chaplain or something like that where I got to go in and help. And it just finally occurred to me that the person I really was ministering to in that moment back in hospice was not her mom. It was my friend, because she was losing her mom. I have not walked through that myself, but I can only imagine how excruciatingly painful that is. And just knowing that I was able to bring her a little bit of comfort. I couldn't fix the situation. I couldn't heal her mom, but I could be there with her in solidarity and spirit. And then just with my presence and my words, hopefully, supporting her through a hard time. And that was really, I think, the kicking off point for me, kind of shifting into trying to take care of caregivers.
How did your friend respond, Amy, when you were providing that support to her?
I mean, she was thankful. There was not really it wasn't like, "Oh, thank you." She did say thank you for saying the prayer. She was more focused on the fact that her mom had responded somewhat, and as she should have been. But like I said before, people have been bringing their painful moments to me for a long time. And there's something where I'm just drawn to wanting to help alleviate that pain when people are hurting.
Yeah, That's a very important role. And I can tell that you take it very seriously, Amy. Have people been able to provide you that level of support as well in your time of being a caregiver?
They have. It wasn't immediate for me, right? I'm one of those people, I'm generally right at the front of the line to offer help to someone, but I don't like to ask for help. And that is something I've had to work through and struggle through. I've been blessed. I'm surrounded by a great support system. My parents both live nearby. I have wonderful neighbors and friends and a church community. But I had to get past the I don't want to raise my hand and ask for help. And I was honestly pushed into doing that by a situation that was so ridiculously out of control.
Yeah.
I really didn't have any other option. We had a couple of years ago, my husband and my son were both quite ill. And it was during COVID, you still all the COVID regulations. My dog was at the vet, potentially needing emergency surgery. And from urgent care, my husband's oxygen was dropping and they're loading him in an ambulance to take him to the hospital. Meanwhile, I can't go. My son is in a different room, also quite ill. They wouldn't let me back there. I was supposed to be actually that morning, ironically, at the funeral of my friend's mother that I was just talking about. And so I was just needed all over the place and I couldn't, I just couldn't. I couldn't be in all the places. I texted a friend and said, basically, will you pray for this? And later in the day, it turned out both of them had the flu. And later in the day, I fell down also and got quite ill.
Mm.
And then my daughter went down. So we were all super sick. So guess what? I literally couldn't go to the pharmacy. I had to raise my hand and ask a neighbor, will you pick up the medication for me? Yes. Mom, will you please go to the vet and retrieve the dog who thankfully did not need surgery? Yes, I will do that. And it was amazing. People just came out of the woodwork to help and do all these things. And then that moment, it was kind of a realization of, you know what? I shouldn't have to be completely down for the count with 103 fever to realize that it's okay to ask for help. People want to help you. It was a lesson I had to learn. It's not something that I just started out with, but the support was always there. I just had to open my eyes to see it.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Amy, because I think a lot of women and just people in general, we find it hard to ask for help, but there's so much strength. And I had to learn it too. There's so much strength in being able to say, I need a helping hand. And
Mhm.
there are people around who will help us. We just have to let them know we need the help.
Absolutely.
Amy, you've navigated the complexities of caregiving, both as a medical professional. You are a retired nurse, or you're not actively working in nursing right now, but as a family member, including the unique experiences of stepping into a family touched by cancer and the loss of a loved one to cancer. How have these different perspectives shaped your understanding of grief, both as a patient and, for those who remain, who are still with us?
Mm. Grief, oh, it's so complex, right? There's something called anticipatory grief, right? Which we often experience before the death. And I know that my husband, who lost his first wife to cancer when she was 30 years old, had anticipatory grief to the point where, as they walked that very long journey, he knew what the outcome was going to be. And so a lot of his grieving, I think, was done kind of as they walked. So it can be anticipatory. My daughter, who's lost her biological mom when that happened, was 2 at the time. And with her, and you see this a lot with children, especially if they lose someone when they're quite young, you might not see the outward signs of grief right away. But as they age and they hit certain milestones, it's very common for the grief to resurface. So even just recently, my daughter had a flare of grief at Mother's Day, which I hadn't seen in years. And, I think it's just as they grow and they're kind of coming into themselves and they hit these milestones, it just resurfaces. It's part of who they are. It's part of their experience, even if it happened when they were really young and they don't necessarily, remember all the details, it shapes them. And so, certainly through my personal experience, I've learned that grief is long lasting. It is for sure long lasting. And I'd say from the professional setting, grief is stressful, right? Like when I would go and take care of a patient, I had to remember that if they're in the hospital, whether I was in the emergency room or just on the regular floor, if they're in the hospital, they're probably having one of the worst days of their life. Things are not good for them. And they're likely, I mean, think about it when you feel horrible. Are you at your best? Not likely. I know I'm not.
Yeah.
People can get short-tempered or grouchy or, they're scared. And oftentimes fear can come across as anger
Mm.
because they don't understand what's going on, or they do understand what's going on and they don't like it, right? It's a terrifying diagnosis or what have you. But I'm a big believer in education and advocacy. I use that still now. Like if I'm talking to someone now and they've got a loved one in the hospital and they think something's not right, I say, okay, first you need to go, if you don't feel like you're getting the care that you need, escalate it up, ask for the charge nurse. Most hospitals have a patient advocate. And, I really believe in, I'm not saying stand up and yell at your healthcare providers, but you have to advocate for yourself. And if you are not capable of doing that, I would encourage you to find a family member, loved one, friend who is. Maybe you've got that friend who you're like, oh my goodness, she's so bossy. I could never do that. She's the one you want in there with you, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If you're having difficulty. But, people, when they're navigating that, they're afraid. And sometimes, even if you can't change the situation, just that touch of compassion, even if they're coming at you in anger, if you're able to just not take it personally and just, take a breath and respond to them with mercy and compassion, sometimes that can just go so far. It can go so far towards helping them to accept whatever is happening or to adjust or even just to take a minute, right? Like they might just say, oh, I need to take a minute. I need to go walk to the vending machine and get a Coke.
Yeah.
And take a minute. And so, yeah, everyone's on their own journey and none of it's easy.
Yeah, that's so true, Amy. Every experience is so different, and personalities come into play, different
Mhm.
circumstances come into play. So it can be different for everyone. What is one thing that helped you? And what is one thing that you wish you had?
Oh, goodness. So I kind of went through a faith journey in my caregiving, right? And while I was in the thick of it, it was a struggle. I was really struggling with my faith, which in hindsight, that was my rock. My faith was my rock. That is what got me through. That is what I'm so glad that I had. Even though if you'd asked me in the moment, I was really struggling. And it was one more thing to feel guilty about to me, right? Like I couldn't do enough. I wasn't enough. I couldn't cure. I couldn't, especially my son became chronically ill and we didn't know what was wrong. And as a mom, I felt like I was supposed to be able to fix it. Well,
Yeah.
I couldn't fix it. And so I really struggled with those feelings of failure. What I wish I had wasn't so much something that I didn't actually have, it was the internal knowledge, right? It was I wish I had known that I was not the only one that felt that way. I somehow in my own head felt like I was the only one who couldn't get it together. I'd look around and see all these other people who just seemed to be handling it, right? And just doing well and, just not missing a beat. And it's like Superwoman over there and Super Caregiver, and they've got it all together. And like, how are they doing this? And the reality is, other people were looking at me and thinking the same thing because I was just faking it, right? Like I didn't want everyone to know, like, oh, she's a fraud, she's a failure, she's not really good at this, she's not really fixing anything. And so what I wish I'd have had was the knowledge that I really wasn't alone and that it's okay to say I'm not okay and to say I don't have it all together. I had just put this pressure on myself that I was, especially when I had multiple people around me who needed care. Well, they're struggling, so I have to be the rock. I can't miss the beat. I can't fall apart. I don't have time to be sad. It's not going to help them if they see that I'm angry. So I just wish I'd had the understanding that so many people are going through this and that my feelings were normal. It didn't make me a bad person because that's what I felt like in the moment, right? Was that if I'd get frustrated, I'm like, well, this person over here is struggling with Alzheimer's and this one's just been in the hospital and this one has this and I don't have anything physically wrong with me and what do I have to be upset about? So I wish I'd have had that understanding.
I've never been a caregiver, but I can totally understand that feeling because when we're going through something challenging and tough, it does feel like we're the only ones going through it. And I
Mhm.
think it's so helpful when we can kind of get out of our heads and get that out and share it with other people because that's where we really find the support that we need. So thank you so much, Amy, for being vulnerable and sharing that because it is hard to say, I didn't have it all figured out.
I still don't have it all figured
That's
out.
right.
But I at least am at the point now where I recognize that I really wasn't alone. These things are normal. And that's what I want. I want to reach that caregiver who's in that place where they feel alone and struggling and say, no, no, I know you feel that way, but you're not alone. Come, let's build community and let's support one another because it's just so important.
Yes, it is. Amy, you talked about your spiritual journey. So
Mm.
now I want to ask about the term spiritual challenges. And you mentioned that there are spiritual challenges in caregiving, and that can mean different things to different people. For you, what have been some of the spiritual questions or struggles that have arisen during your caregiving journey?
Sure. I personally really struggled with watching my loved ones suffer. And I would just cry out, why? Like, why would a good God allow this horrible thing over here that's happening? And it's just, it's unfair. And I especially struggled with that with my son because as hard as it is when our parents or in-laws or any loved one is aging and, they're becoming elderly and their bodies are kind of wearing out, it's hard, but we at least kind of anticipate it. Like we understand that's the circle of life, right? But when I was looking at a child who previously healthy is now in and out of the hospital, we can't get answers. I couldn't fix it. I was angry and I was just really crying out, saying, why would you let this happen? I'm one of those, I'll say things happen for a reason, and we may not see it right now, but eventually, we're all part of the tapestry, basically. But I couldn't see it. And it would make me question, why would you let this happen? And how could this possibly be good? Which was a short hop skip into, are you really good? And then it was, oh, now I'm even questioning my faith. And that was just like one more log on the fire, basically, of things I wasn't doing well because I wasn't even standing firm. I mean, I was, but I was questioning. And I really struggled with that concept of why suffering exists and why does it, it's easy to see if there's some horrible person who's, been running around murdering people and they get some bad ill, you're like, oh, karma, right?
Exactly.
But that's not how it works. And, when you've got an innocent kid who is just stricken down out of nowhere, it's hard and it feels unjust. And so
Yes.
I really, really struggled with that personally.
Thank you for sharing that. You touched on so many important topics, and at times you do question things. I know we're not supposed to, but for me, it's like I just want to make sense out of it if there's any
Mhm.
sense to be made. And sometimes it is really hard to just accept things as they are. But
Mhm.
that's the point of having faith and believing that God is doing what he needs to do in all of those things. That can even be tough to share as well that, hey, I was kind of shaken in my faith and I was questioning things. But it's so important for people to know that these are things that happen.
Right. And I think that's part of what's so important, especially in caregiving, just to kind of, bring it out into the open a little bit. I think, so many of us are walking this journey and we're afraid, the last thing we want to do, we have a loved one. If you're caregiving, that means you have a loved one who needs care. And the last thing we want to do is make their life harder or make them feel guilty that you're providing care or anything like that. So we tend to just try to keep it to ourselves, right? Don't make waves, or as my mother would have told me when I was young, don't cause a scene, right? And so I think we isolate ourselves, and caregiving can, first of all, just be physically isolating. But on top of that, we emotionally, I think, start to isolate ourselves. And the more we do that, the more disconnected we feel, and the harder it seems to reach out and say, hey, I'm feeling disconnected and lonely, and I need some help over here. Because now you feel like you're just on this island far, far from shore. So I think it's just really important that we talk about that and offer support to the caregivers in our lives, because I bet you know one.
Absolutely. You've talked about supporting caregivers. You've given a couple tips, but Amy, please share with us how you actually support caregivers and what you want caregivers to know.
First, what I want them to know, first of all, thank you. Thank you for what you're doing. I know that caregiving is a job that sometimes you do get thanks, but oftentimes it goes unseen and unnoticed. But what you're doing is so, so important. So thank you. And no, I want caregivers to understand their value. And for me, part of what I talk about in my book is that our value is not earned. It is, I believe with my faith, that it is God-given, that we are inherently valuable. And it's so easy for us to buy into that misconception that our worth is determined by our economic output or our achievements, our trophies. We measure ourselves with a worldly measuring stick. And I think that caregiving, it's hard and it's holy and it's an honor. I'd say one of the things, it stuck with me so much. I met this woman at a conference and she was telling me about how she had been taking care of her sister for all these many, many years, and her sister had finally passed. And she was sharing that in the midst of it, in the caregiving, how hard it was and how exhausted she was, and just, all of these negative emotions that she was struggling with. And she looked at me and she said, and now that she's gone, she goes, what I wouldn't give to wipe her bottom one more time, what I wouldn't give to do that task that she hated doing. And of course, it's normal to get frustrated when you're doing lots of, those physical caregiving tasks. But know that on the other side of it, you'll be able to look back and see that it was an honor to get to take care of that person and to really minister to them. And caregiving is a very intimate, personal thing, and they have to put a certain amount of trust in you to be able to do that. So it's a very special relationship. It can be a complicated one, depending on the situation, for sure. But it's just so important what you're doing. For support, I would say, personally, I've started a caregiver support group at my church. I'm on social media talking about let's recognize caregivers. We see you. And that's the other thing. It's so easy to just blend in and you feel kind of invisible, right? Especially, so if you're taking care of someone, and people say you're at a party, right? They say, oh, how is your loved one doing? Tell me all the things, what's going on? And so you kind of become just this conduit of information about the person you're taking care of. And you start to kind of lose yourself a little bit, because oftentimes people won't say, okay, so that's great, he's doing well. And how are you? How are you holding up? What's going on with you? What books have you read lately? Or what's the last fun thing you did? Caregiving is so important. And you are more than what you do. You are an individual person with a life and relationships and likes and dislikes. And none of that goes away because you also become a caregiver. But it can feel like it's slipping away. So I would say whatever you can do to hold on to those pieces of yourself that kind of make you who you are, just hold tight to those, because those are really important. It's so easy to get swamped with caregiving, but who you are is important. So hold on to that.
So, what have you done fun lately?
What have I done fun lately? Well, our big project right now is my husband and I are designing or building our retirement home. So
Nice.
our youngest two children should be graduating high school next spring. So we are building in the mountains in my happy place. We were actually meeting with the designer yesterday and talking about some of the selections for the house. And I'm a total homebody, by the way. Like, I'm not a go out to the clubs or the crowds and the concerts. Put me at home. So that was really fun. So that was fun. I'm having fun thinking about kind of that next stage and what that's going to look like.
Nice. Congratulations. That's exciting.
Thank you.
Amy, you mentioned your book. Please tell the audience more about your book, the title, and where they can find your book.
Okay. My book is called Enduring Together: Strength for the Weary Caregiver. I do write from a Christian perspective, and it is designed to meet caregivers compassionately, right where they are in the middle of the hard and the complicated, but always pointing them back to hope in Jesus, and to the value that they inherently have. My hope is that I can kind of hold your hand, right? And walk with you, because I've been there. I've been in those dark, really, really hard places. And I don't know it all. I don't have it all together, but I know the way a little bit. I've kind of been there. So that's just my project for reaching out and trying to take care of people. It can be found on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, pretty much wherever books are sold online. And you can also find a link for it on my website, which is amychastain.com.
I will make sure to put that in the listen notes. So for anyone who's interested, they will know where to get it.
Great.
Amy, what are some of the biggest challenges that caregivers face? And as a society, how can we better support caregivers?
I'm glad you asked that. That is so, so important. There's a study done every 5 years by the National Alliance for Caregiving and AARP. The latest data I have off of that is from 2020. But that told us that 53 million Americans, 1 in 5 of us, have been a caregiver in the last year. Okay. So the first thing is I want you to know how many people are caregivers. There's an issue coming on the horizon, and we're already seeing some of it, which is as the generations have changed, right? You've got those baby boomers are aging. We are starting to have more people that need care and fewer people available to give it to them, which means that you've got, fewer people doing more work and maybe more burdensome work. Maybe they're taking care of 2 or 3 relatives, not just one, or maybe the level of care that they're giving is more intense than it was before. The economic value that caregivers provide, I think the stat for the 2023 update was that it was $600 billion in unpaid care. Okay. That's the hours that are being put in. And so there's a huge economic, it's more than paid care, right? And the other thing is, as we look toward, as a society, we need to have our eyes open because the healthcare system, while there's a lot of good things about it, there's a lot of problems also, as you well know. There's a nursing shortage, and we're about to have a lot of nurses retire, and we are not filling the funnel fast enough. And part of that, it's a little tricky, and I wouldn't have known this had I not been in that program. People say, well, just put more of them through school. Well, nursing is different in that it's not just a classroom experience. You have to have clinical training. So you have to have nurses available to train the young ones or the new ones. So there's this bottleneck, basically. But we're coming into a situation where the population's aging, the rate of Alzheimer's is increasing. There are fewer younger people to take care of it. And our paid caregivers, whether it's doctors and nurses or patient techs, CNAs, it's hard to keep those people in the jobs. That's hard work. If you're talking about the staff, for instance, at a nursing home, they don't make a lot of money and they do very, very hard work. And it's very easy to get into that cycle. The place is short staffed. It's not paid well. The person is then struggling to be successful in his or her job because of that environment. And then they quit and you're just on this hamster wheel. So as a society, we need to realize that unpaid caregivers are filling a huge, huge gap right now. And if they are not there, I don't even know what that's going to look like. Because the other thing with caregivers is you'll find is we often are putting off self-care. If you're caregiving, you are likely under stress. You're under emotional stress. You're probably under physical stress. You've probably not had enough sleep, maybe not getting proper nutrition, not exercising. You're under all that emotional stress. And for a lot of families, you're also under financial stress. It is very common for a caregiver to still be working, but now you're having to juggle. I need to take time off to take dad to the doctor or, whatever it is. There's an emergency and I can't go to work today. And so at a time when their expenses are going up because they have medical bills for their loved one or just, needing to buy medical supplies or whatever it is, they've got increased expenses at a time when they're struggling to stay afloat at work, right? Because they've got all these extra responsibilities and they keep getting pulled away. It's not a good situation. And a lot of people feel like they're just barely hanging on. And, if we as a society suddenly lose $600 billion worth of care in a year, we don't have the professionals to step in, even if we had the money. How are we going to do that? So I think it benefits all of us to recognize, wow, we need to support them. We need to see them. We need to talk to them. We need to ask them what they need. And that's everything from just, being a good neighbor, right? My parents have a couple of really elderly ladies for neighbors, and they get their mail for them, right? The mailboxes are right at the end of the driveway. But both of these women are, fall risks and have had several falls and have had a lot of problems. So when they take the dog out for a walk, they just stroll by and get the mail and take it up and leave it on the porch. It doesn't have to be a big thing, right? But there's something most of us can do because, again, caregivers are everywhere. And I think just, again, as a society, we need to step in and help them because they're struggling. And the alternative for what happens if we don't put that support under them, like I said, I don't even know what that's going to look like, but it's not going to be pretty. It's not. We need to start talking about this more and asking how we can support caregivers. Sometimes it's just the reaching out and seeing them. And maybe there's legislative things that need to happen. I don't know. And I'm certainly not going to talk about politics. But again, collectively, I think that we need to be looking, because if it doesn't affect you right now, I'm so happy for you. And it probably will at some point, whether you need a caregiver or whether you're going to become one at some point. It's very likely to touch your family in some way. And so, I just believe that we're better in community. We're better in community, and none of us should be walking this road alone.
Wow, Amy, thank you so much for sharing those staggering statistics. And it's so important that we are aware of what caregivers do. The question I have for you, Amy, is for people who are not caregivers at this moment, who haven't had to become caregivers, what advice or tips do you have for them just in case they have to be in the future? How can they kind of start to prepare, or what should they start thinking about now?
Mm. So that's a tricky question because it's different for every family. And, if I'm talking to a 20-year-old, my advice is probably going to be a little different than if I'm talking to, a 50-year-old woman with aging parents. However, sometimes the caregiving stuff you can see coming down the road, right? So if you're stepping into a situation where you're early on in a diagnosis, especially something that's progressive, such as Alzheimer's, you're going to want to get affairs in order. And people hear that and they think, oh my gosh, I don't want to talk about a funeral. And that's not necessarily what I mean. But in some cases, you do need to do that sort of planning, but have the hard conversations. I know it's awkward. Ask your parents or your spouse, like, if something were to happen to you, what are your wishes? What would you want your care to look like? For instance, I would personally like to be taken care of in the home. My husband's father, we lost to Alzheimer's. And my husband is adamant that I should not try to take care of him in the home, that he would want me to put him in memory care, which is not what I would tend to do, but he has made his wishes very, very clear. So just having some of those conversations ahead of time and knowing where things are. I was actually at a seminar recently for the adult children of aging parents, and there was an attorney that came to speak with us, and she was sharing some of the things about the legal documents, right? About power of attorney, and financial power of attorney versus healthcare power of attorney. Just knowing, kind of getting some of those things in place, and some other simple things like having lists of medication and medical history for your parents somewhere accessible should something happen, should you need to be able to get that information to a hospital, just so that in the moment you're not scrambling. It's still going to be chaotic. If something happens, there's an accident, there's a heart attack, a stroke, that's chaotic. But there are things we can do. We can't prevent the storm from coming, but we can prepare for it. We can kind of board up the windows and do a little advanced planning. It won't stop. It won't stop what's going to happen, but it might make our lives a little easier. And I think communication is one of those things that is just, really, really important in this area. Just knowing, what do people want? And that's a two-way conversation, because if you are going to be the caregiver, if you've got mom who says, oh, well, if your dad passes away first, I'm moving in with you. And you're like, I don't think so. That's a conversation to go ahead and have right then. Don't wait. If it comes up and someone's wishes are in conflict with what you would envision, have the conversation. It's awkward. It's hard. I get that. But I would really encourage you to go ahead and have that conversation, because, taking ownership of that, you can advocate for yourself. So maybe you say, well, mom, why would you want to do that? Well, I'd be so lonely. So maybe we talk about an assisted living or a senior community, or, well, maybe you really would want to stay in your house, and let's set up these social things for you if loneliness is the concern. So again, a lot of stuff and a lot of conflict is actually driven by fear. And so just with kind and compassionate, open communication and patience, I'm going to say add a lot of patience in there, you can work through a lot. I would say start talking about it early. And if it doesn't go well the first time, dust off, let it settle a little bit, maybe try again down the line. It's a hard topic.
It is very hard. And like you said, Amy, most of us are going to experience being a caregiver in our lives. And so I think it is so important to be as proactive as possible. If you haven't had to step into the caregiver role yet, and just be aware of the resources that are available to you and even the person you're caring for. Just be aware where to go, where to look, who to talk to. I think all of those things are so important, because as Amy shared, it can really help ease some of that stress. and some of that uncertainty of talking to another caregiver to
Mhm.
just kind of see what their experience has been like and some of the things that have helped them. So thank you, Amy, for those tips.
Of
I just
course.
want to circle back around, Amy, because I think this is so important. Why is it important that society recognize the work that caregivers are doing? Now, that was kind of wrapped up in your previous response,
Mhm.
but is there anything in particular, Amy, that you want to point out about why caregivers should be recognized?
They are the glue that's holding our families together. We don't see it, right? Like, we don't see the 5 hours on the phone with the insurance company trying to straighten out a claim. We don't see all the time, or we don't realize the time back and forth to the different doctor's appointments and testing and waiting in waiting rooms. But the caregivers are doing the work day in and day out. And we live in a society that tends to like to ooh and ah over the big fancy things, right? Like the coolest new concert and had these record setting this or the new tech toy or, oh, this person's so great. Caregivers are often doing what is considered boring work or unpleasant work. It's just like, oh, anybody could do that. Like, oh, so you drove someone to the doctor, big deal. Well, it is a big deal. It is a big deal. And caregivers are helping not only the society at large, they're individual, they're the glue in their families, right? So for their family, it might mean that their care allows mom and dad to still live independently for now. But as a society, don't we want mom and dad to be able to live independently for now? Isn't that better for everyone? I'm a huge believer in intergenerational relationships, right? Like, I've seen, it's been a while, but I've seen some articles in the past about, like, nursing homes where the preschools come in and visit or something like that. I'm like, yes, that is amazing because, it's good for everyone. And when we are lifting up a group, a segment of society, such as those who are receiving care, and helping them to live their best lives for as long as possible, that benefits all of us. It really does. And it makes our family stronger. It makes our community stronger, it makes our country stronger. And I believe we're designed for community and connection. And I think that recognizing the work that caregivers do, so much of it behind the scenes, they often feel invisible. But what they're doing, they maybe are the invisible support structure, right? Like the steel beams inside the building that we don't all see, but we need them. We need them. So just, a word of thanks, just a moment of recognition, a hug, just sitting with someone for a minute and just your presence can make all the difference. It can make all the difference for that caregiver that day to kind of renew their fuel, basically, to just like, yes, I can keep going and this is important. Sometimes we just need the reminder.
So true, Amy. So please make sure you recognize the caregivers in your lives, whether it's your friends, your family, your coworkers, they need that extra support and kind words because they are doing really tough work. It's not easy. I, again, have not been a caregiver, but I do know people who are caregivers. And I just remember what my mom was going through caring for me when I had cancer. It is a lot of work and it's emotionally taxing as well. And so let's just be mindful and be more aware of caregivers and the very important work that they're doing. On the flip side of that, Amy, I want to touch on stigma and
Mm.
how can we move forward towards erasing the silent stigma around caregiving and illness?
I think it just starts with a conversation. This podcast is a great example. Just being able to share our stories and to be able to say, this happened to me. This thing happened to me. It wasn't good or it was unpleasant or I was scared. We keep so much of it inside. And I think there's also with illness, people don't know what to say. And when they feel awkward and they don't know what to say, sometimes they just retreat and they don't say anything because that feels like the safest option because they're so afraid of saying the wrong thing. And it's just having the discussion. I remember my grandmother's sister who ended up passing from breast cancer when she was quite ill. My grandmother was there visiting her. And everybody just was doing the whole, oh, it's going to be okay. We're going to get through this, trying to cheer her on and support her. And she got so mad and she sat down and told my grandma, like, I just want somebody to cry with me.
Oh, yes.
And it was like, wow, of course she did. Of course she needed someone to let her have that emotion. But of course, people around her, they didn't want to say, oh, poor you. Oh, no, you're going to die. I mean, who says that? You don't say that.
Hmm.
So I think part of it is, the more we talk about it, the less awkward it's going to become, the less scary it's going to become. And sometimes that starts with maybe the caregiver has to be the one to say, hey, sorry, you guys might not think this is a good topic right now, but I need to talk about this. What do you think? Or the person who is struggling with illness says, hey guys, I know you're afraid of saying something wrong to me and making me upset, but I really miss having my friends. Can you come over and let's play cards? When my grandfather got very ill, he had several friends, and a lot of them, I mean, boy, they stuck like glue. There were people who stood in the gap, but there were others, I think, who had that. They were afraid of saying something wrong or hurting his feelings. Or the other part of that is sometimes seeing it, right? You see your friend with cancer, or you see someone else's parent with Alzheimer's, or you do whatever the situation is, it starts to feel too real. And it starts to feel like if it could happen to them, it could happen to me. And that feels uncomfortable. So we distance ourselves. So, and that's kind of a natural reaction, right? None of us want to sit around and think about, oh no, all the bad things that might happen. But I think if we start to talk about that and, really just start to open up those lines of communication, I think that's going to be so important.
I agree. Communication is key. And it sounds so simple, but it can be one of the hardest things.
Absolutely. It is complicated. And why? It's because it's vulnerable.
Yes.
Because to raise your hand and say, I'm not okay right now, or I'm not doing well, or even if it's just, you know what, I had a bad day, right? Like if I've had a horrible day, I've got maybe one or two people that I would say, you know what, I was really short with the kids today. And I lost my temper and I said something I shouldn't have, and I feel really bad about it. But here's the whole ugly truth of what just went down, right? There's a couple people I would say that to, but not many. But at least make sure you have, right? Because you don't want to out yourself. Like you're already feeling bad about whatever happened. But those are the things we most need to talk about and work through. It's a full time, it never ceases. When another human being is depending on you, even if you're not with them, even if you're caregiving from afar, like that phone can ring at 3 a.m. You know that you can be in the middle of your big presentation at work and something's going to go sideways and you got someone knocking on the door saying, oh, there's a phone call for you. That happens, but we can be of so much support to one another. And I just think that that's so, so important. And it starts with just being vulnerable and just know if you're in that place feeling like, oh, I'm the only one that feels this way, you're not. I promise you, you're not. I promise you're not the first person to feel this. You're not the first one to lose your temper with the person you're taking care of and say some mean thing or have a mean thought and then think, oh my gosh, I can't believe I just thought that about this person that I love. What is wrong with me? What is wrong with you is nothing. It is that you are exhausted. There's actually, let me touch on this. I don't know if your listeners have heard of this. There is something actually called compassion fatigue. And you see it a lot with healthcare providers. And it's kind of a running joke, like ER doctors and nurses tend to have a very dark sense of humor. And there's a reason for that. You kind of have that to cope because at some point, in a professional setting, you have to maintain a certain degree of distance so that you can do your job. There's a reason we generally don't have surgeons operating on their wives and kids or their husbands or their dads, right? Because you need that professional distance. And in a caregiving home situation, you don't have that. So it can just be a little extra tricky.
Thank you, Amy, for sharing that information. It's so important. And to hear it from someone who isn't in that caregiving role, it just adds so much value to what you're sharing. As we wrap up here, Amy, what does the phrase navigating cancer together mean to you, having served as a caregiver for so many years?
So when I hear navigating cancer together, I've been thinking on this, and I think it's that our journeys are individual but intertwined. Everyone is having a different experience. For example, when my husband's first wife was going through cancer, she was the patient. She was the one physically struggling, but he was in the situation as the husband and the provider and trying to still go to work. And so he had a different experience. Her mother and father came to live with them and were caregiving for her and the child who was very, very young. And the child, again, has a different experience, but cancer it touches everyone in the family. It touches them differently. but it's part of their experience. And so it's individual, but it's intertwined because they're living together in that home. And so you've got that of the people in the home, but also in the community, as you see it. And you see it sometimes. My daughter had a friend in middle school who had an osteosarcoma, and she did eventually pass away from the disease, but there was a ton of community support. And so you saw the entire, schools, churches, there were events, fundraisers rallying around this precious child. It touches so many people. And even if it just touches them, some of us, it comes and punches us in the face. And some people, it just does a little tap on the shoulder. But it's there, it's part of our journey. And, I think if we can just have an open mind and approach one another with mercy and understanding that the person next to you, her journey or his journey is different than yours, and that's okay. And maybe you can learn something from one another, like lean on each other and use that as a good thing.
Thank you, Amy. Please share with the listeners, the valued listeners, where they can find you, your website, your social media, and then any closing words that you'd like to leave us with.
Great. So you can find me on my website, amychastain.com. I'm also on Facebook as Amy Chastain Author and at Amy Chastain Author on Instagram. And if you want to check out the website, I actually have some free resources put together called the Caregivers Toolkit that are designed to kind of aid you in your journey and make things a little easier. And just in closing, thank you for having me. And to all the caregivers out there, thank you for what you do. I know it's often unseen, but it's so necessary. It's so important. And so just today, I hope you go forward encouraged. I'm feeling a little encouraged today. And we just thank you.
Amy, thank you for all that you do as a caregiver and all that you have done as a nurse as well. Such important work in both of those roles. And thank you so much, Amy, for such a valuable conversation for Caregivers Month this November. It was a pleasure having you as a guest.
Oh, it was my honor to be here. Thank you so much.
Valued listeners, after hearing Amy's perspective, what's one aspect of caregiving, either a challenge or a moment of connection, that resonated with your own experiences or understanding? Please send your responses to nctpodcastfan@gmail.com, or you can also reply or leave a comment on Spotify under this episode for Navigating Cancer Together. I may read some of your responses on future episodes. If this episode helped you or a loved one, share it on social media platforms such as LinkedIn and Instagram with the hashtag Navigating Cancer Together, and together is capitalized. I would like to thank Leah's Haven, Calming Health and Wellness Coaching, for sponsoring this special episode. For Caregivers Month, Leah's Haven provides health and wellness coaching to nurses and other healthcare or medical professionals who are experiencing burnout. Leah's Haven can help nurses and medical professionals go from burnout to balance. Find more information about Leah's Haven in the show notes for this episode. Before we end, I would like to give a shout out to the Navigating Cancer Together community and valued listeners. Thank you so much for joining us. That is it for this Wednesday. And until next time, let's keep navigating cancer together. Take care.